guard. Like, she's getting contested at the rim a lot. But I think that just speaks to her speed and her basketball IQ. Like, felt like we were really on the same page last night and understanding like when to cut, when to get open, things like that. And I think that would be important going into today. But she's amazing. Like everything.
When the final buzzer rang inside the packed Target Center, the scoreboard told only a tiny fraction of the story. The Indiana Fever had just suffered a grueling defeat at the hands of the Minnesota Lynx, but the real chaos was happening right on the sideline. In full view of thousands of screaming fans and millions of viewers watching at home, Caitlin Clark turned toward head coach Stephanie White in a fiery exchange that instantly set the entire sports world ablaze. Hands were waving, words were flying back and forth with intense energy, and the visible frustration between Indiana's young superstar and her head coach was impossible to ignore. It was an unfiltered, raw moment of high-stakes tension that revealed just how fragile the balance can be when elite expectations meet harsh reality on the hardwood. To fully understand why this intense conflict exploded in such public fashion, you have to rewind to the moment Stephanie White was hired to take the helm in Indiana. White didn't just walk into the locker room as a standard head coach. She returned to the franchise as a proven winner, a former champion, and one of the most respected analytical minds in modern basketball. She was brought in specifically to inject defensive rigor, tactical structure, and veteran discipline into a young squad that had spent the previous season running a high-octane, somewhat chaotic offense. On paper, pairing a brilliant tactical mind like White with a generational, instinctual playmaker like Clark sounded like a championship match made in heaven. But beneath the media hype and corporate optimism was an inevitable collision between two very different basketball philosophies. Caitlin Clark's game is built on speed, relentless confidence, and spontaneous decision-making from deep beyond the arc. She thrives in transition, pushing the pace before defensive schemes can set up, and making split-second reads that defy traditional playbooks. Stephanie White, on the other hand, demands meticulous spatial awareness, disciplined ball movement, and absolute commitment to defensive rotations on every single possession. When those two mindsets align, Indiana looks completely unstoppable. But when an opponent finds a way to disrupt that rhythm, the gap between Clark's intuitive genius and White's structured expectations can turn into a massive fault line that threatens to split the team wide open. That fault line was cracked wide open by the Minnesota Lynx, a team led by veteran head coach Cheryl Reeve, who is widely considered one of the absolute defensive masterminds of modern women's basketball. Reeve came into this matchup with a singular, ruthless objective: make life a living nightmare for Caitlin Clark, from the very first seconds of the game clock. Minnesota didn't just play standard defense. They deployed a brutal blitz scheme, double-teaming Clark the moment she crossed half court, trapping her against the sideline, and using physical perimeter defenders to bump her off her driving lines. Every cut was contested, every screen was met with hard physical contact, and every single pass required extreme physical effort under heavy pressure. As the first quarter unfolded, the physical toll began to show on the floor in painful detail. Minnesota's defenders were constantly hand-checking, grabbing jerseys off the ball, and stepping into Clark's landing space, daring the officials to blow the whistle on every play. But, as is often the case in high-intensity WNBA rivalries, the referees allowed a highly physical style of play to continue uninterrupted. Whistles remained tucked away in pockets on plays where Clark was clearly bumped while attempting shots or trying to navigate heavy double teams. With every uncalled foul and every hard contact that went unpunished, the temperature on the Indiana bench began to rise, setting the stage for an absolute breakdown in emotional control. By the time the second half rolled around, the structural cracks in Indiana's game plan were impossible to hide from anyone in the building. Minnesota's constant blitzing forced Clark into making rapid decisions under severe duress, leading to a string of uncharacteristic turnovers that turned directly into fast break points for the Lynx. Whenever Clark brought the ball up the court, she looked over at the bench, expecting tactical adjustments. A quick change in screening angles, a set play to clear out space, or a tactical call to draw defenders away from the aggressive trap. But the coaching staff was demanding better execution of the existing sets, urging the young guard to make the simple pass and trust the ball movement within the established system. The disconnect reached a critical boiling point midway through the fourth quarter during a high-pressure timeout called by Indiana as the Lynx pulled away with a decisive double-digit lead. As the players gathered around the huddle, the frustration that had been quietly building for 2 hours completely overflowed into public view. Clark walked to the bench, dripping with sweat and visibly agitated, pointing back toward the court and openly challenging the tactical play calling. She wasn't holding back her feelings. She was expressing deep dissatisfaction with how the team was responding to Minnesota's relentless defensive pressure and how the offense was being structured in the final critical minutes. Stephanie White did not sit back and quietly absorb the criticism from her young star. Instead, the veteran head coach closed her clipboard, stepped directly into the center of the huddle, and met her players' passionate energy with equal intensity. White fired back with sharp, direct words, demanding that Clark take immediate accountability for defensive lapses and costly turnover choices, rather than complaining about referee calls or system design. The two stood almost face to face, engaged in a heated back and forth that left teammates standing in complete silence around the huddle. The body language was electric with anger, with both individuals refusing to back down an inch in the heat of the moment. What made the confrontation so striking to fans in the arena and viewers at home was the total lack of restraint on display. In modern professional sports, player-coach disagreements are usually hidden behind hand towels, kept inside private locker rooms, or masked by carefully timed television timeouts. But this argument was raw, visible, and completely exposed to the elements. Every hand gesture, every sharp look, and every jawing remark was captured by broadcast cameras from multiple angles. It was clear to everyone watching that this wasn't just a routine exchange about a missed defensive assignment. It was a fundamental clash of wills between the face of the franchise and the leader on the sideline. As the final buzzer finally mercifully sounded, and the loss was made official, the tension didn't magically dissipate into thin air. Walking off the floor into the tunnel, Clark continued to exchange intense words with members of the coaching staff, her face a mask of bitter disappointment. Broadcast cameras trailed them all the way to the locker room doors, which slammed shut behind them, leaving the waiting media outside to speculate on what was transpiring behind those closed doors. The post-game atmosphere was charged with intense speculation, as sports reporters immediately began drafting headlines about a potential internal crisis, consuming the Indiana Fever organization from the inside out. When the media was finally granted access to the press conference room, all eyes were focused on the podium, waiting to see how both individuals would address the giant elephant in the room. Stephanie White took the microphone first, sitting with a composed but stern expression. Rather than offering smooth public relations answers or downplaying the event, White addressed the incident head-on with surprising bluntness. She made it clear that while high emotion and competitive fire are essential components of great players, maintaining emotional discipline under adversity is mandatory if this franchise ever hopes to win a championship. She didn't throw Clark under the bus, but she firmly reinforced her authority, making sure everyone understood that no single player is above team standards. Minutes later, Caitlin Clark took her place at the podium, in front of the flashing cameras. Dressed in her post-game clothes, her voice carried a mix of lingering frustration and tactical realism. She didn't apologize for her passion, nor did she try to act like the confrontation never happened. Instead, she framed the exchange as a direct byproduct of her intense hatred of losing. She stated openly that when the team isn't executing properly, and when adjustments aren't working, emotions are going to flare up on the floor. She acknowledged that both she and Coach White want the exact same outcome, to win games, but admitted that their methods of processing frustration during the heat of battle can look extremely aggressive to outside observers. While the post-game press conference helped cool off immediate media hysteria, the national sports media landscape immediately grabbed onto the story and ran with it at full speed. Morning talk shows, podcast networks, and basketball analysts spent hours dissecting every single frame of the sideline footage. Hot take creators argued that Clark was acting like an unchecked player who refuses to be coached, while defenders claimed that White was failing to adapt her rigid system to unleash the generational talent of her star guard. Rival fan bases flooded social media with clips, mocking the apparent breakdown of team chemistry and predicting a turbulent season ahead for the Fever. But beneath all the loud media noise and sensationalized headlines lies a much deeper, more complex story about what it actually takes to integrate a generational talent into a high-level professional team. When a player enters the league with unprecedented fan interest, massive endorsement deals, and historic expectations, the normal power dynamic inside a sports organization gets completely thrown off balance. Every mistake is magnified tenfold. Every loss feels like a national crisis. And every coaching decision is analyzed by millions of armchair experts. Managing that level of outside noise while trying to build actual on-court chemistry is one of the single hardest jobs in professional sports today. What many casual fans fail to realize is that extreme physical play targeted at Clark has become a deliberate, league-wide trend. Opposing franchises have recognized that the key to beating Indiana is not just outplaying them tactically, but outmuscling them mentally and physically. Defenders hit Clark hard on screens, bump her continuously away from the ball, and try to provoke emotional reactions that lead to technical fouls or split-second lapses in concentration. Minnesota executed this strategy to perfection, pushing Clark to her emotional boiling point and exploiting the resulting frustration to build a decisive victory. This relentless physical pounding naturally bleeds into a player's relationship with their coaching staff over the course of a long season. When a star player feels like they are taking a beating on the floor without sufficient tactical protection or loud support from their bench, frustration inevitably turns inward. Clark's outburst wasn't just about a single lost possession or a missed shot. It was the accumulation of weeks of taking hard hits, dealing with non-calls from officials, and feeling like the team's offensive adjustments were coming too slowly to counter aggressive defensive blitzes from top-tier opponents. Teammates like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell find themselves navigating an extraordinarily delicate environment in the middle of all this drama. As core leaders who were with the team before the massive media spotlight arrived, they have to maintain locker room cohesion while bridging the gap between their star guard and their head coach. In the aftermath of the Minnesota game, both players emphasized the need for unity, reminding reporters that passionate arguments are common in elite sports locker rooms. They insisted that the argument between Clark and White wasn't a sign of toxic division, but rather the painful growing pains of a young group trying to figure out how to stand up to physical adversity. Looking back through basketball history, intense clashes between legendary coaches and superstar players are actually far more common than people think. Some of the greatest dynasties in sports history were forged in the middle of explosive sideline arguments and public disagreements. Icons like Phil Jackson and Kobe Bryant, Greg Popovich and Tony Parker, or Gino Auriemma and his legendary point guards frequently engaged in screaming matches during timeouts. Great coaches don't want quiet, passive players who accept defeat gracefully. They want fierce competitors who burn with passion. The challenge is never eliminating that passion, but directing it so it destroys the opponent instead of damaging the team inside the huddle. For Stephanie White, the task ahead is clear, yet incredibly challenging for any leader. She must find a way to honor Clark's natural offensive brilliance while firmly establishing tactical boundaries that prevent chaotic turnovers during high-pressure games. She has to show her superstar that structural discipline isn't meant to restrict her freedom, but to protect her from being worn down by aggressive defensive schemes like the one Minnesota deployed. If White can earn Clark's absolute trust in those high-stakes moments, Indiana will transition from a high-scoring novelty act into a cold-blooded, championship-ready juggernaut that no team wants to face. For Caitlin Clark, this dramatic moment represents a critical chapter in her career evolution as an elite athlete. Greatness in professional sports is not measured solely by spectacular deep three-pointers or viral assist highlights. It is measured by emotional resilience, leadership under fire, and the ability to elevate teammates when everything is going wrong around you. Learning how to channel extreme frustration into focused, disciplined execution when officials aren't calling fouls and when defenses are trapping aggressively is the final frontier in her transition from a collegiate superstar into a dominant professional champion. The loss to the Minnesota Lynx exposed real vulnerabilities in Indiana's tactical execution and emotional maturity, but it also stripped away any lingering illusions about how easy this journey was going to be. The Wnba is an elite, unrelenting league filled with veteran teams that will show zero mercy to rising stars. Minnesota proved that if you press the right buttons, you can disturb Indiana's balance and create chaos on their sideline. Every other team on the schedule watched that game with razor-sharp attention and will attempt to replicate that exact same physical game plan until Indiana proves they can overcome it. As the Fever prepare for their upcoming slate of games, the sideline dynamics will be scrutinized like never before by media and fans alike. Every timeout huddle, every tactical exchange, and every gesture between Clark and White will be recorded, replayed, and analyzed under an intense national spotlight. But inside the locker room, that fiery encounter in Minnesota might just be the exact wake-up call this team desperately needed to reach the next level. Sometimes a building has to shake before the foundation settles properly, and sometimes a team has to boil over before it truly learns how to simmer under intense pressure. Ultimately, what happened between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White was not the end of a working relationship, but a harsh baptism by fire. It was a raw, unfiltered demonstration of two elite basketball minds refusing to accept mediocrity or settle for an embarrassing defeat without fighting back. Whether this confrontation becomes the moment that fractures Indiana's chemistry or the spark that fuels a relentless championship drive depends entirely on how both women respond when the lights turn on for the next game. One thing is absolute. The story of this season just became 10 times more intense, and nobody in the basketball world will be looking away anytime soon. The road ahead is long, grueling, and filled with aggressive opponents who want nothing more than to see this young roster break down under the weight of immense expectation. But if Clark and White can convert this momentary conflict into a shared tactical vision, the rest of the league will soon find out that a passionate superstar and a disciplined head coach working in complete alignment is the single most dangerous combination in all of basketball. The fire has been lit, the challenge has been laid out in public view, and now the only thing left to do is see who bends and who conquers on the hardwood. Fans, analysts, and rivals will continue to debate who was right and who was wrong during those intense seconds on the Minnesota sideline. Some will see a coach re-establishing authority, while others will see a star player demanding better execution from her bench staff. But true basketball purists know that this level of friction is the necessary price of admission for reaching upper echelon success in elite sports. You cannot build